welcome to Download, where we bring you discussion analysis from a Catholic perspective. Today's Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. I'm Brad Eli, here with my two co-hosts, William Mahoney, Christine Niles. And join us today in the fourth chair is Nick Wiley. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Brad.
As we mentioned in yesterday's show, today is the 5th anniversary of when the news broke that then Cardinal Theodore McCarrick had been credibly accused of sex abuse. Today is day 2 of our week-long special looking at McCarrick, the clerics who covered for him, and the sex abuse crisis in general. I'd like to start off with the big question, who knew what and when? That's what we're trying to pinpoint down here. We didn't get a lot of clarity back in 2018. Let's take a look at what McCarrick's secretary, Monsignor Anthony Figueredo, had to say about this whole sort of deal, but we didn't learn about this until 2019. Let's take a listen.
Restrictions were imposed back in 2008. They followed accusations, allegations, and settlements by 2 dioceses, which means there was something serious going on. At the same time, McCarrick was allowed to continue his travels, to meet here in Rome with high-ranking officials, including, the secretaries of state. Who knew what and when, and why were these restrictions not enforced?
Okay, good questions. Okay.
I think we have to remember, after Vigano, aired his bombshell testimony on August 22nd of 2018, and it caused this earthquake in the church. We had all sorts of individuals in the hierarchy, as well as the establishment media, scrambling for cover, trying to paint Vigano as a liar, denying that anybody knew, denying that Pope Benedict ever imposed any restrictions, all sorts of denials from all over the place. And so eventually that's why Monsignor Figueredo came out. Late, obviously, it was many, many months later, but he says, I've had lots of time to think about this, pray about this, and I've made the decision that I need to publish this. And one of the things that he publishes was actually McCarrick's letter from August 25th, 2008 to then Papal Nuncio Archbishop Pietro Sambi, where McCarrick acknowledges the restrictions. He says, part of it, I am ready to accept the Holy Father's will in my regard. In the future, I will make no commitment to accept any public appearances or talks without the express permission of the Apostolic Nuncio or the Holy See itself. So there, he was also, restricted in travel. So this was vindication of what Vigano was saying when people were saying he was a liar.
Oh, absolutely. Mm-hmm. B, let me ask you a question. Why would you think restrictions aren't enforced at times or ignored at times? What's in it for prelates to do something like that?
For the person giving the restriction or for the person receiving the restriction?
Just wherever he's at. Theodore McCarrick is in some new diocese or whatever, and they're just, rolling through. Why
not enforce the restrictions on him?
Why not?
I think in the case of Pope Francis, a large part of why he became Pope was McCarrick was influential in that, and I think the way sometimes these guys operate is they reward each other. So it's kind of like, okay, you got my back, so I'm just going to kind of look the other way now. We'll just not worry about these restrictions right now. So I think
part of that reward probably is not mutual destruction, because everybody's got skeletons rattling around in their closet.
Yeah, that could be a part of it.
Something else too that was revealed in this correspondence that Monsignor Figueredo published was Wuerl lied. He was caught again lying.
There you go.
Called him a shameless liar. He was caught lying because when all this came out, Wuerl said, didn't know anything about the restrictions, didn't know. His spokesman, Ed McFadden, actually said, he told Catholic News Agency, Cardinal Wuerl did not receive
We actually have that as a graphic coming up.
Oh, do we? I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
No problem. Let's go ahead and take a look at those words that Christine's taking a look at. So this is Cardinal Wuerl, and this would be in August of 2018. This is from his spokesman, Ed McFadden. Cardinal Wuerl did not receive documentation or information from the Holy See specific to Cardinal McCarrick's behavior or any of the prohibitions on his life and ministry suggested by Archbishop Vigano. Now, Vigano already called him a shameless liar. Now, before we move on there, go ahead.
Yeah, that was contradicted by what McCarrick himself said, because he acknowledges in that letter to Sambi, I received these restrictions, I passed them on to my archbishop. At the time, the archbishop was Worrell of D.C. So he knew back in 2008.
And then we didn't know a lot of that until Figueiredo comes out and starts publishing all this correspondence. Figueiredo.
We didn't, but Worrell did. So
and that didn't come out until May. Worrell said, you guys can't do the homework. All these documents aren't known. You're not going to be able to find this out. And this is what he had to tell CBS on August 2018 when asked directly, do you know if McCarrick has been clericalizing other priests? Let's take a listen.
Were you aware of the rumors McCarrick was having relationships with other priests?
No.
No. Well, a few days later, the PA grand jury comes out and he's listed like 169 times in there. So, and also he was actually named, I think Christine brought this up yesterday, he was in on taking a settlement. Now, Figueiredo, remember, he said settled settlements.
Right.
So something serious was going on. The church doesn't settle a settlement. And Worrell's named on those. So he knew about it there. He was the guy that took it to Rome. He had to. My name is on the document. And basically, all of that is under his hat when he's going, oh, no, I didn't know anything. Oh, I didn't know anything. So it was interesting. But I'm going to tell you that all these guys banked on the fact that everything was going to stay under wraps for a long period of time. Then Figueiredo comes out in May. We saw it there. I just wanted to throw that on a chronological order just because to set it all up. So now let's also take a backdrop in 2018, along with Worrell lying about all this stuff. Cardinal Kevin Farrell, he's the head of the dicastery of Laity, Family, and Life. He's also the Camerlingo. Keep that in mind. The Camerlingo is the guy in charge when the Pope dies. And if COVID 2023 or 2024 happens during that conclave period, you can't get anybody there, and it's an extended period, he's in charge during that period of time. So let's take a listen what poor Farrell had to say when he heard the news that McCarrick had been credibly accused.
The only thing I can tell you about McCarrick is I was shocked, overwhelmed. I never heard any of this before. When the 6 years I was there with him, and no indication, none whatsoever. Nobody ever talked to me about that. And I was heavily involved in Washington in the whole, from 2000 on, in the sex abuse.
6 years.
Apparently he was roommates with him for 6 years, and he had no idea, no indication whatsoever. And I believe he was shocked. He was shocked that they got caught. That's what I believe, I don't believe for a minute he didn't know that. I know dirt on people that I didn't live with,
But he did live with him.
He lived with the guy. I mean, you can't not know. You can't not know.
When he said I was, the 6 years that I was with him, and he means with him, like roommates with him.
Yeah, exactly.
People coming and people going, and who's that person, and who's that person coming with you? And
you don't hide people.
They left really late last night.
Yeah. No, and also, it reminds me of the line, methinks he protesteth, he does protest too much.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, I had no idea, nothing whatsoever, none, nothing.
Yeah.
It's like, okay.
It's like a little kid that's telling you, I didn't knock over that plant at all.
Yeah, I just wonder, do these guys practice lying in the mirror? Because they're really good at the straight face, kind of even look you in the eye kind of lie. Not there's no shame in it, which that shows. Because if there's any shame, you start looking down, start doing other little things, but it's just perfectly straight, looking you in the eye. There's no shame. They probably practiced this 100 times before they had to go on air one day and actually talk about it.
In this case, I don't think he had a lot of time to practice, which is why I'm not an expert in body language, but watch him carefully if you watch it. His eyes don't match what he's saying. And when the guy first asks him, he does look away. He goes, and he's trying to think of what to say. So I just don't get that. That's not studied. I've seen better lies.
Yeah, but
that was a studied
a lot of these guys.
You're right, in general.
They all can say it, especially the Worrell thing,
Well, he's very good at it.
Yeah, he's very good at it.
Yeah.
A lot of the other cardinals, whatever it comes to. I mean, not even in this situation, but all the situations. I mean, they've all had to deal with.
They're usually great
sex abuse in their diocese, and they all just
and I think
never knew anything.
a lot of these people have been living double lives for so long that they've just gotten accustomed to lying. They've become so good at it because they've led this double life for so long.
They're a pretty hard-boiled egg. Their
Yeah.
conscience is pretty
I
serious.
mean, if you think about it, everything they do has to be a lie. Their homilies, everything.
After all of the I'm shocked protests came out, we have Bishop Stephen Lopes. He was a homily that he gave on a Sunday, and we took a soundbite out of it. We'd played it back in 2018. This was September 2018 when he gave, he's the bishop for the personal ordinary to the chair of St. Peter. And this is his take on the whole thing. Let's take a listen.
It's the parade of cardinals and bishops who have rushed to the television cameras, clutching their pectoral crosses, saying, "I knew nothing." I don't believe it, and I am one of them. I don't believe it. Because as one of the youngest bishops in the conference, you do get an interesting perspective. Like for the fact that I was a seminarian when Theodore McCarrick was named Archbishop of Newark. And he would visit the seminary often, and we all knew.
That's a big statement there, we all knew. I mean, he's saying it like the way he's saying it, there's no lie about it. We all knew. There's just a way when you speak like that that's like, oh.
Yeah, and he's the one who went to the Pontifical North American College, and that's where McCarrick had a very close relationship. He would spend nights there. You were there and you heard stuff.
Yeah, I'll tell you this about that. I think it was just the year before the Summer of Shame. McCarrick was honored. He got a Man of the Year award at the North American College. I believe it was just the year right before. So all up until that point, they knew nothing. They're even awarding him as Man of the Year and having a big rector's dinner, which is a thing they do where they all wear cassocks and pretend they're Catholic so that they can get donor money. Yeah, it's true because they hate the cassock. They won't let you wear it. But as soon as the donors show up, there they all are in their cassocks. Yeah.
Yeah, that none of them knew, apparently, but yeah, they all knew. And then, so if they knew, they would have probably also known about these sanctions, going back to the sanctions, because this isn't like some nobody bishop in some no-name diocese out there who you could forget about. This is like one of the highest ranking people and most influential, maybe in like the whole world at the time, like when it comes to just influence he had on other people and other bishops around him. So it's not like you just have these things, and that's where I think the Pope and all is at fault. All three popes that are involved in his time as bishop and cardinal and all, is because they have these sanctions, and then you don't forget this guy who everybody knows, who apparently is making all these trips back and forth to Rome. You don't pull him aside and say, hey, did you remember what I told you last time? Never.
Yeah, Bishop Bransfield, who was resigned and all of that too, he was paying off, sending gifts, large gifts to different Lori and other high-ranking prelates. And so there's a lot of money that just flows out. There's a lot of mutual destruction would happen if you do blow a whistle. And then there's just the whole political rhetoric thing that I just don't want to get involved in your own personal stuff. It's just, I don't know all the details. I know some of the details, but I don't know everything, and I don't know how it all worked out. And it's politically incorrect of me to get involved with that. Kind of like bringing up somebody's messy divorce or something at Thanksgiving dinner. You just don't really go there. Right or wrong, good or bad, there's just human people in charge of positions of authority in the church, and that's how things roll out.
And I appreciate Bishop Lopes' honesty, because you almost never hear that. I don't know of any other bishop who has come out and said, frankly, we all knew. I mean, I appreciate that. I just wish that we could hear this from other bishops. Instead, we get things like Bishop Nestow, now of Richmond, Virginia, having these elaborate penitential services where he lies flat on the ground and takes off his mitre, lays down his staff, and it's like, oh, we have to do penance because of what happened to McCarrick, when he was one of McCarrick's guys who protected him. But he's just they're
like
putting on this show, hoping that the laity will simply forget and go back to sleep, and it's business as usual. And I hate to say it, but I feel like largely that's what's happened.
Yeah, because I wonder how much some of these guys still are scared of what he could say about them. Like, why would they admit to knowing things about him? Why would they accuse him of anything when, I mean, he made almost all these guys, like all the guys you see around today, in some way, shape, or form, he signed the stamp on, or he made himself, like, I want this guy, all those different things. And so he's got dirt on them too. And so until he dies, I don't really see people ever going at him in some substantial way.
I think when you say he has dirt on him too, I think they make a point of having dirt on people. That's why you're playing touchy-feely with McCarrick beforehand. Can I control you? Will you play ball? Are you going to be, outing me? Are you going to stand on principle? Whatever. And those type of people, first of all, the goodbye good men are like shuffled off. You got to just stand up for the truth. Second of all, compromised weak people who will just, and then you get the political people who are just along for the glory of it.
To your point, Brad, the grooming is not just sexual. They're also grooming for who they're going to elevate into their own ranks, and there has to be people they can control.
Yeah.
And one of the big reasons they pick people like Worrell, for example, or Checchio and Metuchen is because they know you're going to come in as the cover-up guy who hushes up everything you did and all the other bad stuff. So then they have mutual dirt on each other. So all the grooming is part of it.
You get so many of those people in positions that it's kind of hard to stand out of that crowd because you're going to be the ouster of the whole thing. So.
Like Lopes, yeah.
But then we did try to push back. 2018 General Assembly. The bishops tried to do the right thing.
So going back in our timeline, so we left off Bishop Lopes. That's September 2018, but also in September 2018, you have a group of 3 that go to Rome, meet with Pope Francis, and have 3 proposals that they want. So this is DiNardo, O'Malley, and Gomez. They meet with the Pope in Rome, and we were covering this as it was happening, and so Michael did a Vortex on it, and here were their 3 proposals that were shot down.
The 3 proposals the Americans laid in front of the Pope were: 1, a full investigation into, quote, the questions surrounding the McCarrick situation. How did he rise to such prominence and maintain his high profile for decades when so many knew of his homosexual rape and assaults against seminarians in the beach house? Specifically, DiNardo presented to Pope Francis for the Vatican to conduct an apostolic visitation into these questions in concert with a group of lay people identified for their expertise by the bishops here in America's lay-run National Review Board, who would be, quote, empowered to act. The second point, an investigation into Archbishop Vigano's charges, exposing a whole homosexual network that is like an octopus with tentacles reaching everywhere, strangling the life out of the church. And number 3, an opening of new and confidential channels for reporting complaints against bishops and advocacy for more effective resolution of future complaints. DiNardo had previously said publicly that all 3 of these goals, quote, will be pursued according to 3 criteria: proper independence, sufficient authority, and substantial leadership by laity. That's why the delegation was in Rome to begin with, to petition His Holiness to launch these investigations. So imagine the utter shock of the men when the Pope just cut them off and said, nope, ain't gonna happen. No investigations, no lay oversight, forget it. I'll take care of all this in the 2-day-long meeting of bishops in Rome that I've called for February.
And that February one we'll go into in a little bit, but that was the sham summit that Supich oversees. But just right there, that's a high watermark for the bishops in this country. They did the right thing. There was so much of a groundswell of the people. I know people were helping to organize those general assemblies and talking points were there. And there was a huge push. And it was like, you either do this or we're going to commit mutiny or something. And they did. And they get shut down.
Yeah. I mean, they made some very good proposals. They made some very good proposals. Now, one thing that Pope Francis took them up on was the investigation into all the claims by Vigano. We will get into that later. The McCarrick report. So he did take them up on that proposal, but it didn't turn out the way that most of us had hoped.
Yeah, that whole McCarrick report thing is going to be another angle there. But the two solutions that Rome were saying was, one, we're going to have this sex summit in Rome, sex abuse summit in Rome in February. We'll get into that. And then, as Christine was talking about, the other solution was we're going to do the McCarrick report. We'll get into all that investigation. The summit in Rome was just such a sham and such a farce. But it was a high water mark. Kudos to the bishops. They stood up, and there was many of them voted. I forget what the voting record, I should have looked that up. But there was a sizable number of the bishops, like 2/3 of the bishops, voted yes, we should investigate McCarrick, how he rose to power, the Vigano, the homosexual complicity. They were voting on those things and saying, let's get into this. 2/3 of them.
Yeah, that's actually surprising that it's not a unanimous thing. I mean, of course they're going to rig any investigation that they do, but for not all of them to say, okay, yeah, we should look at this. It's kind of crazy to me. I mean, of course you should look at it. You can put in whatever results you want. I mean, no one's going to really challenge you on that. How would they? How could they know what you're looking at when you make these reports? But yeah, I can't believe it took so long, which we're going to get into, but the fact that this wasn't just some overwhelming thing like, oh, we should, nip this in the bud very, very quickly, but that's just never been the style of any of these people, so it's more of the same, I guess.
Well, some of those bishops are complicit. Some of those bishops know if you look into this, it's going to expose me. So, yeah, they're voting
and
against
And all of them, yeah.
The assembly itself, then.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then Cardinal DiNardo is asked about this in November. So a couple months later, he's asked about this by someone in the audience, and here
Day one of the General Assembly.
Yeah, and here was what he said.
What do you say to these folks who are disappointed that even these small steps are going to be denied them for another several months?
We have accepted with disappointment this particular event that took place this morning. We have not lessened in any of our resolve for actions. We are going to work intensely on these items of action. We can't vote on totally.
So yeah, that wasn't anything new. He said, well, we heard about this morning. And I know, you heard it. Did you watch the Vortex? Well, you ought to. They heard about it in September when they went to Rome. DiNardo himself went to Rome. And the Pope said no. And he's like, oh, well, yeah, this morning we heard about that. It was kind of seen as, the nuncio came in and put his foot down right there. You knew the foot was going to be put down. You were shot down in September. We reported on it. I mean, how did we know it if it wasn't reality?
And also, it's really important to note, too, at that Baltimore Assembly of the U.S. bishops, the papal nuncio, Archbishop Christophe Pierre, was seen frequently at dinner and various other parts of the assembly with Cardinal Wuerl and with Cardinal Cupich. So they were all clearly very, colluding together, talking together, having the Pope's ear, and very much involved in this decision to shoot down these proposals.
Yeah, it's an amazing thing. About the same time, then, though, we had our own push for our own rally to go on there.
Yeah, so there was also at that same time, there's the Silence Stops Now rally. And so this was the first time that James Grine, who was, victim of McCarrick, spoke publicly about all these things. And so this was the world's kind of coming out party with him, because he was the one in the New York lawsuit that became public in 2018. But this is his first time speaking publicly about it to the world.
I am James Grine, a child, now man, who was physically abused by Theodore McCarrick for 18 years. The abuse began when I was only 11 years old. I have to admit that right now, my whole body is shaking, so please bear with me.
That was very courageous for James to come out. I actually had a chance to sit with him before he went on stage. We were kind of having lunch there in the hotel with Michael and some others, and he was absolutely terrified. He actually was thinking of not doing it, and we were trying to encourage him to do it, and he had a speech and everything. And he had bodyguards with him because he was afraid. Obviously, this is someone who's going to out one of the most powerful cardinals in the world, and so he was afraid for his life. But ever since he came out publicly about that, he has really gotten the ball rolling. Now we have McCarrick facing 2 criminal prosecutions in separate states. And so good things are coming out from this. He's also revealed some other individuals who colluded with McCarrick and abused him as well, including Cardinal Bernardine, which people have pretty much ignored. They haven't looked into that, including the Illinois Attorney General. But yeah, it was very courageous for James to have come out that time and made everything public.
And there's pictures too of him as a young teenager with McCarrick, standing in swimsuits and stuff. Yeah. So this goes back for a long time. You've interviewed him before.
I've seen it. Yeah, I think we've all talked to him at this point. Yeah,
and I mean, it's not like some guy coming out and saying, oh, well, this guy did it, I don't have any evidence. There was a whole history of the two of them and how that. One of the things that really hit me with James Grine when he said, I don't know if he was telling me this one time when he came or if he was just talking in general, but he said there's something about abuse when it happens that whatever age you were, if you were 12 years old when you get abused or whatever, and the abuse will come up again, like when you're 16 or 17 or 18, people are like, well, why don't you speak out that? There's something in you that kind of is a shell that you go back to that 12-year-old mentality. And it really hit me at that time that it's like something gets kind of seared in your psychology.
Oh, yeah.
And it takes you back to that vulnerable, time when you're not. It's not exactly as if you were 22 and it just happens for the first time. You've already been, injured.
Well, there's an arrested development that happens there. I mean, of course, I know here we talk to a lot of abuse victims, but I know of others also outside of here, and it's very common that they can become completely functioning adults. They can be extremely intelligent. They can become professionals in whatever field, but whenever it comes to the abuse itself, they become like little kids.
Puts them right back to whenever
puts them like when they were a little kid.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what a lot of people don't understand about victims. They'll come in and maybe they've had the critics have a totally normal, healthy, emotional development and everything. They've never undergone any sort of abuse or trauma, and so they look and they're like, how did they allow him to abuse him for so long, even into adulthood? They don't understand. It's because it's part of the whole grooming process. When you're a child, it messes you up completely psychologically, emotionally, and then the person kind of makes you beholden to them, they have a certain power over you, and which people don't understand, and it does continue. And it takes a long time to be able to break free from that. And there's a lot of shame, too, in the victims because they think, why didn't I? They themselves blame themselves. Thinking, why didn't I stop a long time ago? But there's this psychological hold. There's the grooming going on. And your entire psychology and thinking are just messed up.
Yeah.
The other thing Grind was talking about, he said, he was talking to McCarrick about this later on, and McCarrick said, no one's ever going to believe you. No one is going to.
Oh well, that's part of the grooming that Christine's talking about, the manipulation. They're scared.
Isolated.
Yeah. Another aspect about this, which is if you read the Pennsylvania report, these predators deliberately pick people who are weaker psychologically. I mean, they look for that. That's part of how they groom you. They're trying to figure out how weak you are. Now, some people with different mindsets or different family upbringing might be able to resist better or whatever else, but they don't make good victims. And when you read this, one of the things in the Pennsylvania report, which is absolutely disgusting, is you find out that some of the priests would have their special altar boys, and they would have abused him and put a cross on him so that other priests would know he was vulnerable and easy to pick on.
I remember.
So they pick people like that. Yeah,
that was the child porn ring in Pittsburgh.
That's it.
Cardinal Wuerl. And Wuerl knew about it, and he paid off one of the child porn priests not to talk about it. That was in my special report. He's a very wicked man. Yeah. But that's exactly right. There was someone who interviewed a pedophile in prison, and they asked, how did you pick out your victims? And the pedophile just said, I can spot them a mile away. I can see 3 boys walking down the street. I can immediately see which one is the weak one, and I will target the weak one. He won't touch the other ones, which is why when people make these arguments like, well, I knew this priest and he never made any, advances on me, so therefore this couldn't happen. It's like, well, because you weren't his type and you weren't weak and you weren't vulnerable, so he just didn't, go after you. So you never would have seen that. But that's not an argument against it actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, then we get to the solution, the sex summit.
Well, Rome's going to take care of it. So that's
Rome.
all right.
So that was in November of 2018. November 2018. DiNardo's like, oh, well, it happened this morning. Well, actually, it happened a couple months earlier. And now the solution, February.
Is the sex summit in February 2019. We have Supage there, the main American guy over there, I guess, overseeing this thing. And they're asking him in the summit, they're asking him about, a question that pops up a lot, both in conservative outside the church and within the church now, is how are you guys going to take care of this when some of the problem are, our priests and our bishops, like you're going to police yourselves basically. And, he kind of dances around that. And, we have a clip of that actually. Let's see how he handles that question.
With regards to cover-up, part of the problem is that priests, bishops, and cardinals are themselves engaged in illicit sexual behavior and therefore are unwilling to denounce each other. And that is a hypothesis both in conservative circles and now being raised again. There's a book coming out shortly by a French gay author who claims that there are these gay relationships in the hierarchy which enable cover-up. In your investigations, Archbishop Scicluna, and in your experience, and perhaps even Father Zollner, in your experience, Cardinal, is that true?
I think you were right in saying it's a hypothesis. And hypotheses have to be proven. And I think that that is something that has to remain at that level of hypothesis.
Well, look, there you go, Brad. I mean, listen,
just a hypothesis.
It's just a hypothesis. The reason you're sitting there is because of McCarrick, so it's more than a hypothesis. I mean, how incredibly stupid are these people?
I think every experiment has a 100% success rate that we've done with this.
Yeah.
Well, keep in mind, Stupich was the one who was interviewed by CBS Chicago and asked point blank, well, what about these claims that Pope Francis rehabilitated McCarrick? And he first said everybody criticizing Pope Francis was a racist. Latin people.
Oh,
then he said, I don't want to go down this rabbit hole.
I remember that.
I think we need to focus on climate change. Those are the issues that matter.
The Pope has bigger things to do, like climate change. I'm like, climate change. Okay.
I mean, it's clearly not a hypothesis. You're sitting there because of your high-ranking prelate McCarrick, and you're going to sit there and tell us, oh well, I mean, we haven't proven that. Why are you sitting there? I know. You know, I mean, the whole thing's so incredibly stupid.
Stupich is the brightest bulb in the
No, he's really not. He's really not.
But unless you see all this in hindsight, I think this is a good thing for this look back, because you can put it all in order right there, and you get such a clearer picture. Hindsight being 2020. I'm telling you, when we're going through the 2018 going forward, it's like, well, who's lying and who's not, and how can you prove this? We didn't have all the pieces. And then you start looking back on then how ridiculous this is. We actually all knew that was ridiculous anyway.
Oh, yeah.
At the summit. But then he gets other questions.
Yeah.
You know, the whole thing about McCarrick was he's abusing adult. We had a thing, hashtag Catholic Me Too. And it came out right after Harvey Weinstein. And Weinstein was actually abusing all these adult starlets and all of this, right? Because of his power. So it was the Me Too movement. Well, it was this Catholic Me Too. It wasn't about abusing little kids. It was about abusing seminarians and priests.
Yeah, so apparently leading up to the summit, they said, I think it was at a youth something or other summit or conference, they were talking about how at the sex summit they were going to also address vulnerable adults, you know, that have been abused by clergy. But that got swept under the rug too. And Ed Penton, actually, the reporter, you know, he actually asked them about that, and they dance around that too. We've got another clip here you can see.
It was often said during the Synod on Youth that abuse of seminarians and vulnerable adults, as it was put, would be addressed at this meeting, partly because of the McCarrick scandal. When this meeting was initially announced, it was to be about the protection of minors and vulnerable adults, but now it seems to be about protection of minors only. I just wanted to know, will this meeting include abuse of vulnerable adults, seminarians in particular? Thanks.
Those other issues of misbehavior on the part of clerics with vulnerable adults or other adults are topics that need addressing. But we are focusing in these days on those who have so little voice. Young people, minors, don't have a voice, and they are kept in silence. So this is about making sure that their voice is heard. That's why we're focusing the attention on that.
Come on, Brad.
Look at that.
Well, and so guys, you see that's why he's, you know, and making that up. I remember seeing the handshake once in a Vortex, because I don't know if we picked it up or not, or we saw it, but Voris in one of the Vortexes, he just had the guy with the editing, camera focuses right in on that thing. And just going like this is like the whole time. You're like, wow, he's really shaking a lot, isn't he? So he had a lot to shake about because he's trying to dance around the truth.
Yeah.
And we all commented on that back in the day about why is this just about, you know, youth and minors and all this?
Because most of McCarrick's victims were not minors. Some of them were, but most of them were seminarians. They were adult seminarians that he slept with and assaulted. Yeah.
And this is what Vigano said. He said to the Holy Father when asked about it in 2013, he said there's a dossier this thick about all the priests, seminarians that McCarrick has either abused, destroyed their vocations, and he didn't talk about minors at all. He said, and his testimony is on our site, you can read it in August of 2018. He recounts that, and it was the priests and seminarians who would take to the beach house, and it was all about control. If I can manipulate you and get you to play sexual ball, and I have the goods on you, and it's mutual destruction, and I know you're never going to come out and stand up. If you keep, you know, cave on these areas, you're going to cave on other areas, and we can always manipulate you, and therefore we're going to elevate you and fast track you, and it was going on for decades in this country.
Yeah, and again, Stupich came to know McCarrick when he was younger, when he was a seminarian. McCarrick helped to promote him. They had this relationship going way back. Vigano points out Stupich really is a McCarrick, handpicked by McCarrick. And so it's just breathtaking, the cover-up and the level of deceit going up to the highest levels in this church. I mean, the sex summit was a total sham with Supich there heading it, the very guy who was handpicked by McCarrick. I mean, it's just, it's when you sit back and you look at it, like I said, it's just breathtaking, the level of deceit and cover-up still going on to this day.
Honestly.
And Supich has a record of not really wanting to go down that rabbit hole anyway.
That's correct. So, you know, his answer there, by the way, was not that shocking, because only at the General Assembly of the United States Bishops Conference, just in November, a little bit earlier, a couple months before.
The big one where they're all going to say, we're going to push back on all this.
Well, he gets up and says basically the same thing. He makes the same distinction that you really need to be treated. It's a different panel of experts, different type of abuse, or maybe it's not abuse and all. Actually, I think we have a clip of that too, so we can
take a listen.
With regard to these boards, to examine those offenses against minors as opposed to adults, I would strongly urge that they be separate. It's a different discipline because in some of the cases with adults involving clerics, it could be consensual sex, anonymous, but also involve adult pornography. There's a whole different set of circumstances that need to come into play here as it's examined, and a whole different skill set as well.
All right, I'm going to be completely honest. That creeps me out, because
anonymous.
Why does he throw the word anonymous in? I wouldn't have even thought of that. It's like, you know, when a bishop's having sex with a guy, you know, anonymously. I mean, it's so bizarre.
Like you say, it's not exactly the brightest bulb in the chandelier.
Like, there you go. The doth protest too much. Yeah,
showing his cards there.
And the whole pedophilia thing, or the porn thing, you know, well, that's a whole different skill set.
Yeah.
Well, dude, you know, if you're into porn and all this, you're probably not flying your ship right.
And also, he says consensual. I mean, is it really and truly consensual when you have this power differential between someone like a powerful cardinal like McCarrick and a seminarian who's down here, and McCarrick says, share my bed with me? I mean, this might be an adult, but is it truly consensual?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point.
I think that's the biggest point. That's the biggest single word when he talks about it might be consensual. Dude, when you're talking about a starlet in Hollywood and it's consensual with Harvey Weinstein, I mean, that was the whole Me Too. It was going on at that time. The whole Me Too movement was just coming out. And when everybody said it's the hashtag Catholic Me Too, everybody got it, that there's this power differential, and if you don't play ball with me, you're not going to get ordained tomorrow, and you're going to have to go back home to Kansas because you're never going to work in the church.
Yeah, and to jump on that point, like I remember when I was at the NAC and McCarrick visited once, this was before everything broke, and the seminarians, they all just fawned on him. They all flocked to him. They worshipped him, it seemed. They were all adults, technically. There's, you know, there was no one there that was a minor. So I could easily see, as to Christine's point, I could easily see, like, you could easily be manipulated because he's got so much power and he can do stuff for you in the church. So.
Yeah, either do stuff for you or against you, and either way, you're either green lighted or you're sent, huh?
Right.
And even in, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, and even then, like being in seminary at that same time as all this is happening, like it's not like all the seminarians are like these dudes who would just like, oh yeah, they'd fight off somebody and they're like super strong-willed and like all these different things. It's like, these guys, I mean, if they are of goodwill, which I believe most of them were, like going there genuinely to discern like whether they had a vocation or not, it's not like they were the best and the brightest of all the men at that age that were there. There were a lot of like weak psychological dudes, or dudes who just like, you know, straight out of high school, either they had been like some were from like weird homeschool families, some had like crazy backgrounds. They come from all different backgrounds, and so that they were in a lot of ways easily manipulated, because I mean it is in some senses like an army type structure in some ways, where it's like you just do what you're told, and you know your life is very structured for you. You do what the priest says, you don't think twice about it. And I mean, I could see where guys would get in this situation where they were groomed for a little while, not even really know that it was happening, and then all of a sudden crazier things start to happen. I mean, we've seen it time and time again, even with guys that we've talked to that were in seminary, whether they've come to us anonymously or later on after. And it's like, me and Michael had this great Vortex a month ago or so about a guy in Baltimore accusing Archbishop Lori of all these different things, where it's like, when you really want to be there and pursue your vocation, you want to live this holy life, like you'll let some things slide in terms of like letting these priests not necessarily sexually take advantage of you, but manipulate you in different ways, and then all of a sudden, who knows where it leads from there.
Well, you know, that whole thing when you said grooming is not like straight up, you know, doing stuff right off the bat. I mean, it's a hand here, and then a hand here, and then a hand here, and and then, down the road, and next thing you know, and so it's a process over time, and it's psychological. You did a special in-depth, well, several on Delaney, right? DeLand, excuse me, in Saginaw. And if you want to get creeped out, listen to the audio of him talking to one of the boys that he's grooming, the teenagers that he's grooming, and how he's talking to him and getting him, all that confidence and everything. I would never judge him.
He's his
this
friend.
And that and everything, and just keeps moving along, and pretty soon you're scrambled in the brain. So. Anyway.
And what's interesting, too, about this power differential between someone as powerful as Carl McCarrick wanting to take sexual advantage of a seminarian or a priest, even secular law acknowledges that this is wrong, and that in more than a dozen states, they punish this as a crime. They actually will criminally prosecute you if you are in a position of spiritual authority over someone else, even if the person's an adult. The person could be an adult who's under you, but if you are in a position of spiritual authority over that person and you have sexual relations with that person, they will criminally prosecute and charge you with a crime because you've taken advantage of that person. So,
good.
Well, then we move on into the actual second stage of the solution, which was supposed to be the investigation, and that landed in a big report that was a big fizzle. So
yeah, the McCarrick report. It was the long-awaited McCarrick report. It took 2 years, and the whole point of the report was supposed to be not just looking at what McCarrick did. That wasn't really. I mean, yes, we already knew McCarrick was wrong. He got defrocked and all of that. But the whole point of the report was they were supposed to be investigating the complicit clergy who surrounded him and protected him. That was the whole point. And so we waited and waited. 2 years comes out, 450 pages long. And what does it do? It makes Pope Francis out to be the great hero, and Archbishop Vigano, the whistleblower, to be the great villain. Vigano is actually mentioned more than 300 times negatively, as if it was his fault. I mean, when I sat there and I was reading through this, I thought, this cannot be real. This is like dystopian. Are you kidding me? This is like the perfect textbook example of gaslighting. When you turn everything around and the guy who's supposed to be the courageous whistleblower turns out to be the villain, and then the man who actually, the villain who rehabilitated this predator, turns out to be the hero. And another kicker, never once did they talk about Wuerl's role in any of it. I think they might have mentioned Wuerl's name once, but it had nothing to do with any of his cover-up of McCarrick. I mean, it was just the most dishonest, like I said, piece of gaslighting that the Vatican has ever issued. And Vigano, we contacted him, and he was just outraged. He was like, I can't believe this. This is unbelievable.
Yeah, Wuerl actually was in Archbishop of Washington, so McCarrick was floating around Washington at the time. So all of the correspondence that Figueredo was talking about is going back and forth in Washington. Wuerl is receiving that, and the nuncios are trying to rein in Wuerl and talk to him. So he knew all of that correspondence because McCarrick is being sheltered there in Washington now. And after 2001. So there was a long period of time when Wuerl was running cover for him, but Wuerl had so many skeletons in his closet that there was no way you could, it was just total mutual destruction. There was no way that you would ever, Wuerl would never come out and out McCarrick because he had, as much bones in his closet as anybody. So.
And someone else they left out too was James Grine. Even though Grine, I know because I spoke with James about this, Grine spoke with a Vatican investigator on numerous occasions. He was looking into the whole McCarrick report. Not once is Grine mentioned in this 450 pages. Not once.
I'll look at a few headlines that came out after the McCarrick report. The media, how did they read it? This is the Washington Post headline. Vatican's McCarrick report says Pope John Paul II knew, in capitals, of misconduct allegations nearly 2 decades before Cardinal's removal. NPR, not that NPR is the greatest, it's above Wikipedia, but not much.
I don't know about that.
And here it is, NPR. Vatican report says Pope John Paul II knew about allegations against former Cardinal. Wall Street Journal. They're better than NPR, but Pope John Paul II was warned about Theodore McCarrick's sex abuse allegations, made him D.C. Archbishop. That's how the media was reading this.
But here's the thing. The report did try to blame JP2. They did try to blame him. Once again, making Pope Francis out to be the big hero and saying, oh, well, Pope John Paul II had all these warnings, and why did he do this? Why did he appoint him to D.C.? Well, keep in mind, it was Jeevish. It was Jeevish whom McCarrick went to. McCarrick paid off Jeevish, as we know. And McCarrick said, I have never, ever, ever committed any sexual abuse ever in my life. He told Jeevish that. Jeevish told that to Pope John Paul II. Pope John Paul II believed Jeevish, rightly or wrongly, but he did. He believed him, and that's why he did it. But still, the fact that they would blame all of this on Pope John Paul II and not have any sort of scrutiny on the very Pope who knew about the restrictions and then rehabilitated him in 2013.
Yeah. Nobody in his
That's
own
the main
country.
point right there.
Yeah.
Nobody in his own country is the villain.
Right.
No one in America knew or had anything to do with it.
Living bishop.
It's all these. It's all these two guys in the Vatican. It was all Vigano.
One's dead, the other's retired.
But this is the strongest point, that it was Pope Francis, who rehabilitated him after Benedict had put restrictions on
I missed that in the report. It was somewhere in there, maybe.
Yeah,
Footnote.
and he doesn't even touch that, right? Oh no, it was JP2's fault.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a complete and total joke. And then there were some. There was a new decree that was handed down by the Pope. It was supposed to be temporary, 3-year temporary decree on investigating bishops for sex abuse and for cover-up, called Vos Estis. And this was supposed to be sort of like the great solution that Pope Francis presented in cleaning out corruption among the hierarchy, specifically bishops, specifically. And he, in March of this year, decided to make it permanent with a few changes. So for instance, in addition to examining sex abuse claims against children, it also includes vulnerable adults. So that's good. But there are a lot of shortcomings with this document as well. Now, so far, about 40 bishops have been examined under Vos Estis. Some of them have been removed. We have about 11 bishops in the United States that were or are being investigated under Vos Estis. 16 bishops from Poland, a number of them who've had to step down. No bishops, as far as I know, who were involved in covering up for McCarrick. And there was actually a good article in a National Catholic Reporter, Broken Clock, a couple times, but it's by Ann Barrett Doyle. And she criticizes Vos Estis for some of the shortcomings because it does not require the bishop to report anything to civil authorities. It leaves it up to him. It's optional. If he wants, and of course, if you leave it optional, they're never going to report to the civil authorities. Secondly, the Vatican has a very strong grip on the entire process. It is the Vatican's decision. They control every single step along the way. The Vatican is the only one that can authorize investigation in the first place. The Vatican renders the verdict, and the Vatican determines the penalties. The Vatican is in charge of every single aspect of this. So, for instance, look at Pope Francis' relationship with Gustavo Zanchetta. Absolutely scandalous. This was a man, Argentine bishop, good friends with Pope Francis going back many, many, many years, accused of sex abuse and cover-up. And yet Pope Francis assigned him to a Vatican post, a very high-ranking Vatican post. In the midst of all these criminal accusations and charges, he actually had to be taken back to Argentina, held on criminal trial, and then convicted. The guy's in prison. And yet this is Pope Francis' judgment. Also, the metropolitan model that allows the archbishop, the metropolitan archbishop who's in charge of the various dioceses, to be the person kind of in charge of the investigation of that particular bishop, all sorts of conflicts of interest. Because you're investigating your colleagues, your friend, your brother bishop. So one example that she points out was when Bishop Nicholas DiMarzio, they did a Vos Estis investigation to him over allegations of sex abuse. Who was the person assigned to oversee that? Cardinal Dolan of New York, who exonerated him. And then he went on a podcast the next week and said of Bishop DiMarzio, oh, he's great, I love him. It's like he didn't even try to sound impartial. And then also, Vos Estis does not require any disclosures to the public, so the public can be kept completely in the dark. Once again, it's just secrecy, lack of transparency. The public doesn't have to know anything about anything. So these are some things that are still shortcomings in Vos Estis.
If you compare that to what we were all surprised when we found DiNardo and Gomez and O'Malley went to Rome with those proposals. If you roll back in the show, and we're not going to right now, but if you roll back when you're watching this to play that little clip right there, what those bishops were asking for of the Holy Father, that lay in participation, that they're empowered to act, that there's this transparency, that it's not all run by the church, that the people do know what's going on, that other people besides bishops are involved substantially in the whole process, that Vigano's claims be investigated, not that he just be villainized, but okay, he said this, what about that? Let's get all the documents out, lay them on the table. he's talking about Montalvo and Sambi, these other Vatican nuncios to America that would preceded Vigano's role there in doing the same thing. These guys are the ones that would know all that documentation and get all that stuff out there. When you say 2008, Benedict put him on ice, McCarrick on ice, and 2013 rehabilitated. Let's take a look at that. Figueredo, all of the documentation saying this letter was written here, this correspondence went out there, this one was to Worrell, this one's to this bishop, and they have that correspondence. There's protocol numbers on those things. All that can be laid out in investigation and say, okay, this would actually show who knew when, who knew what, and when, how much did they know, and what was done following up on that. Absolutely, completely, easily done. Under the whole, just shine the light on where all the darkness is there and bring those documents. Every single one of those documents exists. Vigano probably has a copy of every one of them anyway in his dossier or whatever. And anyway, you can throw all those documents on the table. No one ever denied that they existed. And do a complete and absolute forensic audit of all the documents and see exactly where they all lead and point to. None of that was done.
Yeah, nobody wants to do it in the hierarchy. I think we should take a moment just to clarify, too, that we absolutely hailed what Vigano did in 2018. I think it was very heroic, courageous. Where he is now, we don't necessarily agree, okay? Because he has now, I think he's openly become head of a contest, I believe, and so we don't necessarily agree with where he's come now. Of course, I understand his frustration. I mean, he must be incredibly frustrated at the state of the church right now because of all of this going on. So.
Yeah, too, if he was listening or someone sent this to him, I would definitely say, well, yes, absolutely, you're a hero. Back in the day, you had great points and you were right about all these things. But, you know, Martin Luther had a lot of great points, too, when he nailed the 99 Theses on the door, or Theses.
I don't know if I'd say a lot of great points.
But there was a lot of corruption in the 1500s. This idea that, you know, we had the Latin Trinity Mass in the 1500s, and Latin Trinity Mass is far superior liturgy that we've ever had. But the idea that back then there was none of this going on, my goodness, there was lots of this corruption going on. He had a right to call foul on that, but then he went outside across the church. The church moved on, healed, corrected, moved on. Those people, all those prelates, priests, and whoever, had to go before God on Judgment Day.
Yeah.
And they are, you know, live or die on their testimony before God and their conscience. But the church moves on and didn't sink. Yeah. And the same with this era right here. So we don't have to worry about Christ failing. We don't have to worry about his promise that the gates of hell will, you know, not prevail.
Just another huge point there. There's a huge difference between the church making disciplinary mistakes, which the church has done since day one, okay, making disciplinary mistakes, imprudent decisions sometimes. That's not the same as the church teaching on faith and morals, right, which is correct, you know, can't be wrong. So the immutable
administratively,
teaching, so you can't leave the church because the church is the only body in this world that has those teachings.
And for those who think that Pope Francis is getting away with stuff, nobody gets away with anything.
That's for sure.
Because we all have to stand before God one day. And if you don't face justice in this life, you're going to face it in the next. Nobody ever gets away with anything, including the Pope and many of his bad and scandalous decisions.
Yeah, true. So I would, I mean, and that's a good point to bring up because we do bring up a lot of the problems of, you know, in the administration in this era, and especially, but we still looked at it as a wonderful revelation that came out in 2018. Why? Because just like a doctor who sees a terrible wound and you know all that pus and everything in there, and you got to lance the wound. Even animals do that; they'll scratch it and it opens up, and that's preliminary to healing. And we were really hoping for a lot of healing, and we didn't get that healing. And then we thought in 2019, my goodness, all of this stuff is going to be connected, all these priests moving across state lines and everything. RICO's going to happen. Well, Biden happened in 2020, so that didn't happen. But anyway, keep praying, stay in the church, stay holy, because that's our mission. Thanks for joining us for today's episode of The Download. Now please join us as we finish in prayer, begging Our Lady's intercession for our nation and our church. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Salve Regina, Mater Misericordiae, vita dulcedo, et nostra salve, ad te clamamus, exules Filii Eve, ad te suspiramus, gementes et flentes, in hoc lacrimarum vale, ea ergo advocata nostra, illos tuos misericordes oculos, ad nos converte, et Iesum benedictum fructum ventris tui, nobis post hoc exilium ostende, O clemens, O pia, O dulcis Virgo Maria. Amen. In the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you again for joining us for The Download. We premiere a new episode like this every weekday at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. From all of us here at Church Militant, God bless you.